talk about achieving spiritual maturity. I would like to tie that in with the counting of the Omer and how important it is for us to understand the different levels of achieving spiritual maturity and its gratifying and exciting nature to do that. All of us in this room, especially I know all of you guys very well, from the very young to the older of us who might be a little bit more mature, spiritual maturity is not something you can set on a shelf. It's something that has to be a constant process that you go through. Spiritual maturity is really about surrendering personal vice. Is really, when it comes to achieving spiritual maturity, attempting to give up your vices is a little bit less glamorous than we hate to say it is. It's not fun sometimes to have to examine yourself and realize there are things that need to be transformed and changed. It's attempting to grow and keep us from growing complacent in indulging habits rather than to battle them and defeat. And yet spiritual progress doesn't work when not accompanied by serious impulse control and self-discipline. The type of internal sacrifice that isn't easy or visible to the public eye. The mind may dream of transcendence, but our legs sometimes get stuck in the mud. It's like we want to change. We want to have transformation. And here in Counting the Omer, we are finding, and we know that this is about a 49 days of reconsideration of where we are at. It's like following in the footsteps of Israel as they left Mitzrayim, Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, and journeyed toward their Torah revelation. Torah revelation requires a level of spiritual maturity. They had to go through these 49 days or steps toward Sinai that was very important. Hasidic teaching unveils the pathology of spirituality without sacrifice, which is an interesting concept because we would think after reading Leviticus everything is about sacrifice. But there are some Hasidic teachings that talk about spiritual sacrifice or spirituality without sacrifice. Though a fascinating halakhic analysis, it revolves around the issue of kosher grain. All of Pesach and the counting of the Omer is about what? It's about grain, right? God instructs us to bring an Omer, which is a measure of barley, offering on the second day of Passover, the 16th of Nisan, until the Omer offering is brought on the altar. All grain that was planted in the past year, beginning from the previous Nisan the 16th, is forbidden for consumption. It says, you shall not eat bread, parched grain flour, or parched kernels from the new crop until this day, until you bring God's sacrifice, which is found in Leviticus 23:14. Very carefully, we're going to observe in these next few minutes of this lecture that there is a prioritization of achieving spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity doesn't come through just knowing stuff. It comes through transforming yourself according to what you know. So a lot of people know a lot of Torah, but it's not really come to life. There's a lot of people who study Torah, and yet it has not become their life itself. It's still like painting up a dirty house. There's something that needs to be changed within. The forbidden new grain planted since the last Nisan and before this year Omer offering is brought is called Chadasa. Chadasa means new. After the Omer offering is brought, all grain that took root before that day is called Yishan, old. It's like the old stuff. It can be eaten. Now you're thinking, why are we talking about when grain can be eaten and not be eaten? What does it matter when it comes and when it should be offered and when it is not offered? We're going to find out it's intimately tied into spiritual maturity. I'm going to show you. Grain was also needed in the Holy Temple for various offerings that were offered, independently or accompaniment of many animal sacrifices. But there was a greater restriction on the use of grain in meal offerings than on grain used in ordinary consumption. To be used in the temple for a meal offering, grain from the new crop had to wait to Shavuot, when the 2-loaf bread offering was offered. Only after living through both the Omer and the bread offering was grain mature enough to be used on the altar. Now here comes the Talmudic analysis. The key word is mature grain. Mature grain. All of this is about maturity. The Talmud answer is as follows: if the grain is hadash, then the meal offering and the sacrifice is accompanied, would be disqualified. But if the grain of the Yashan offering was, and the 2-loaf offering had been offered, then post facto the meal offering was valid, and the grain is not ideal, but not totally disqualified. So Hasidic masters teach that all facets of the Torah work in unison. We understand that everything in the Torah basically repeats itself over and over and over to instill a powerful value and an understanding. As a matter of fact, if we can understand one part of Torah and its many different levels of understanding, when we get to a new part and you study it, you should understand we should find the pattern inside. Now let's look. Let's first begin to decode these characters. The first one is the Omer offering. It was comprised of barley. A food in biblical times was considered a staple in the animal diet. Now, what connection is that to spiritual maturity? The first offering that has to be given. How is the animal diet connected to spiritual maturity of a human? Just a wild guess.
Animal nature.
Animal nature, exactly. So the first offering to be brought before you can do anything else has to be your animal nature. It means that the thing that sustains the animal nature, the barley, it's presented to the Creator. It's given to the Creator. It represents the work of committing our animalistic tendencies to follow God's template of morality. Sacrificing barley means surrendering our natural impulses and to instead follow a divine code, the code articulated in the Torah. Bread, by contrast, is a staple of human consumption. Now, 2 loaves offerings of bread. Now, how many here are bread makers? Let me see, all the bread makers. I've never made bread a day in my life. There's a science to it. All right? There's yeast, certain measurements of yeast. There's time. There's, it has to sit and puff up, or what do you want to call it? Yeast up, rise, bow up, something. There is a science to it. So the key word here is bread is more complex, like humans are more complex. You see, the bread offering represents the committing of our human tendencies to be more like God. Humans are creatures that are much more sophisticated in reasoning skills, yet even intellect must be refined. Taught to eschew egocentric reasoning in favor of truth-seeking reasoning. Even Torah study can make various motivations ranging from honor-seeking to altruistic ideas. Offering bread represents the work of refining the noble human activities until they sparkle within humanity. So the bread offering that is brought at this time, during this time of the year, we see, wow, what does Hashem want from us after Pesach? He wants us to continue on. The Pesach lamb, the Paschal lamb, was sacrificed in Egypt for the salvation of the firstborn son of the family. It was the pivotal moment in which God drew them out of Egypt. Someone asked the question, why does the Paschal lamb, why is it so important for the offering, and why was meat so important in the offering? Do you realize that, think of your most favorite barbecue joint. Most favorite. That's what Jerusalem smelled like. Roasted meat. Now it's interesting, he says that God gives offerings, sacrificial offerings, to be given so that it causes mankind to be attracted to the altar. Why are you attracted? Through your base need. Your base need. What is the base need? Your stomach. The way to a man's heart is his stomach. And smell. And most of us, you can see us men, have some big hearts.
Smell and taste go together.
Smell and taste go together. So the whole idea is you would be attracted, and especially for Passover, it says that a person who comes, who's attracted to this and smells this great smell, like, oh, I want to do this. And they say, well, the problem is you're not circumcised. And you haven't been properly cleansed. And then it's like, whoa, I've got to make that commitment, but it's worth it. If I get to have that great lamb on the spit, I'll do it. The whole point is that God builds up this whole concept of connecting to Him through our senses, almost overpowering our normal senses that is ego-driven, to say, I'm willing to submit myself to the Creator. Now, let's go on to the next one. Every day the high priest offered a meal offering, which was consumed on the altar. And we learned from Rabbi Chlorphine that the meal offering was about a pinch like this with a full hand, right? Yeah, it'd be thrown on. Yeah, in the palm of the hand. Every day the high priest would offer this, consuming the offering, symbolizing the personal request, and this is beautiful. What happened to the meal offering when it landed? What happened to it when it landed on the fire? Completely consumed, right? It's a flash. And remember, it's refined. I don't know if you remember some years back, there was a huge grain elevator that sparked and exploded, and it was amazing. It was like dynamite, right? Well, think about this. You take refined flour and you put it on the fire, it goes up. What Hashem is telling us that the ultimate goal of spiritual maturity in the end is to be consumed by the fire of Hashem. To be consumed in such a level of inspiration that we're completely fueled by godliness. That our whole life just completely is consumed. You see, ultimately, spiritual maturity cannot be achieved at all if you have no desire to be consumed by God. It's not going to happen. You do what you like, or you do what you love. If you're consumed by Hashem and consumed by His Torah, then it is a guarantee that you will mature spiritually. How can we penetrate the surface of the law of kosher grain to see its perfected reflection in this mystical thought? The grain, the ideal grain for use in the meal offering is the grain that was developed past the 2 loaves offering. Only after one offers his or her bread and is conscious of maintaining a humble and altruistic approach to human development is he or she ready to be part of the meal offering, to pursue a life of spiritual expansion, and to be role models to others. But if one hasn't offered the 2-loaf offering, if one has not yet sacrificed their ego and is still motivated largely by their egocentric drives, his or her spiritual service is valid but not ideal. However, if one hasn't even offered the Omar offering, which that means you've not come and brought that part of your animalistic nature and to sacrifice it. It hasn't surrendered his or her animalistic instincts to God, then that individual is not qualified to be a meal offering. The spiritual achievements and hollow example of such a person can be deceptively determinal to him or her and to others. If you can't let God into your kitchen and into your cabinets, you're not going to be able to be spiritually refined. What is the whole idea of cleaning the chametz out of your cabinets? Is searching for that which causes ego, corruption. If we're not willing to open up every avenue of our inner sanctum, our inner temple, and allow Hashem to examine every little nook and cranny, allow the light of Hashem to come in, then we will never achieve spiritual maturity. Rabbi Nachman of Brislov talks about not living in an illusion. It's so easy to be in an illusional world in the dark. If you've ever awakened in the middle of the night to not turn on the light to wake up your spouse or children, and then you hit your pinky toe right on the edge of a couch, you realize what an illusional world you were living in because you thought you cleared it. The point is this, is that every one of us has a desire to want to connect to Hashem, but there are some things that are incremental, that is important, that has to be done. The first step is to check your animalistic nature and offer it to Hashem and say, instead of me operating off of my base instincts, I will operate off of your Torah law, the things that tell me how to guide my life. Second, the bread offering that I bring to you is going to be an offering that has been refined. When I come to you, Hashem, I promise you that I will refine myself every day, not just for 49 days, but for every day of the week we refine ourselves. We're at the cashier and we go to cash out and we say something we shouldn't have said, boom, you know it needs to be refined. Whatever it may be, we understand that authentic piety and connection to God and authenticity has to come from being transparent and allowing the illumination of God to come into your life. When we achieve that, it is just as if we have brought these three offerings to Him. And every day that we walk during this 49 days of connecting to Hashem, may you see the steps made clear by the light of the Torah. That concludes the Shirim, and we'll go into our discussion of the Torah portion. But before we go, if anybody has any questions, comments, love to hear comments. Anybody have insight?